Well, welcome to the In the Chair Theology Symposium sponsored by the John H. Pickford Chair of Theology at ACTS and Northwest Seminaries. My name is Catherine Bubel. I am an assistant professor at Trinity Western in the Department of English and Creative Writing. And we want to just begin by acknowledging that the Langley campus of Trinity Western University is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Stolo people. Our presentation tonight is titled Incarnate Words, the Theology of Writing in the Age of ChatGPT. Shivers up your spine, everyone. Our presenter this evening, Holly Faith Nelson, is professor of the early modern literature and beyond. You
several interests.
Yes, many things. Over the years at Trinity Western University, and so especially the era of the turn to the techno-scientific epistemology or frame. She holds a Ph.D. in English with a focus on theology and literature from Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, BC. And before enrolling in university, she first completed a 2-year diploma from Northwest Baptist Theological College, where she was awarded the W.D. Robinson Memorial Prize for Theology. She has authored and co-edited 11 books, several on the intersection of theology and literature, and such as the volumes Through a Glass Darkly, Suffering, the Sacred and the Sublime in Literature and Theory, and French Women Authors, The Significance of the Spiritual, 1400 to 2000. Dr. Nelson has a long-standing interest in the interface of digital technology and the humanities. Obviously, we all do, which is, we're so glad to see so many of you out tonight. Completing 2 courses in this field at the University of Victoria and the University of Oxford. Her respondent for this evening is Michael Morelli. He is the Assistant Professor of Theology, Culture, and Ethics here at Northwest. He holds a PhD in Theological Ethics from the University of Aberdeen, Scotland. He is the author of Theology, Ethics, and Technology in the work of Jacques Ellul and Paul Virilio, a nascent theological tradition, and editor of Desert, Wilderness, Wasteland, and Word, a new essay by Jacques Ellul and 5 critical engagements. He publishes and presents on a variety of topics within the fields of theology, morality, culture, politics, and technology. He has also worked in local church ministry and continues to serve the church in a lay capacity. So Michael will be responding immediately after Holly has given her talk. And please welcome Dr. Holly Faith Nelson.
You can tell me if I need to move the mic at all. Well, thank you very much for coming, especially for those who were able to come in person. I was saying how important it is for me to have these incarnate, sort of enfleshed beings in front of me, because then I can feel all of your energy, and it's very encouraging. I want to begin with 2 brief statements. Firstly, when I give talks, I'm not giving the last word. I'm not the authority of all things, although I may look it, but I'm not. And so when I speak, it's to start a dialogue. So if you disagree with things I say or question them, I'm glad. That's a positive thing. So there's no worries if you want to say, no, I completely disagree, or you want to challenge anything that I have. The second thing I want to say is that nothing that you write is your own. There's always co-authorship in some way, either by reading masses of texts, some of which I brought with me, and Dr. Bubel did too, and some were conversations I had. So I read the work of Professor Bob Doty, which was very inspirational on me, and had many conversations and correspondence with Professor Bubel and Tanvi Surawanshi, who is working in the MA Interdisciplinary Humanities at Trinity. She and I had a very illuminating conversation on this subject. And Ken Pearson, who works in the library, helped direct me to a critical book that I'll be discussing. And Ken Pearson has saved me so many times you could not even begin to imagine. He has more degrees than me, so almost 5 degrees. So he's just a remarkable person and intellectual in his own right. So they don't share any blame with me, but they did influence my thinking in some ways. My talk will only be 30 minutes, so don't be afraid if you were worried about that. And then we'll have the response. Language, whether in oral or written form, has always been of great significance to Christians. Given the Johannine emphasis on Christ as Logos, the Word of God, Christians tend to move from the association of Christ with the Word to a potential connection between language and the sublime, the transcendent, the truth, the wise, and the meaningful. David Lyle Jeffrey once called Christians the people of the book, but we are also people of the words. Postmodern thinkers, including Jacques Derrida and Roland Barthes, have resisted the Christian impulse to tie the word to a centralized meaning authorized by a transcendent being. They emphasize the fact that words simply refer to other words, which refer to other words ad infinitum. Therefore, the word is for them a free-floating signifier. It floats over meaning, or an opportunity for the free play of meanings, rather than an opportunity to limit meaning. The word or sign, as Derrida and Barthes might say, moves us away from authority, stability, and origin, and struggles against any attempt to be transformed into a relic or ornament. Christians have never denied that the word or language is rich in meaning, and thus often ambiguous. Augustine and many apophatic mystics, for example, recognized the limitations of the human signifier, or the word, in the attempt to describe or define the transcendental signified, that is God. One 19th century theologian, Charles Gore, lamented the reality that we are compelled to entrust the deep things of religion to the perils of human expression. However, in the case of theologians, this is a lamentable loss, whereas for the likes of Derrida and Barthes, it is not. For Augustine, we should still work toward finding the truest meanings possible. Whereas many postmodernists think that of language as a fun house or prison house in which to experiment, neo-Marxists viewed it, in the words of Frederick Jameson, as a prison house. They believe we are hailed into an ideological system that uses language as one tool to lure us in without us knowing what is happening, subjecting us to its will, tricking us into thinking we are acting of our own accord. Most Christians would see some truth in this theory. After all, evangelical parents are often very cautious about the ideology into which their children are hailed, and therefore do not allow them to read a series of books, including at one point J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series. However, Christian theologians tend to be more optimistic about human agency, the ability of adults to choose the ideology or belief system to which they subscribe. Now, a postmodernist might not find threatening new AI technology such as ChatGPT, which means chat generative pre-training transformer, which sifts through data to gather information and reproduce texts in various genres in response to questions posed by humans. If, as postmodernists were once fond of saying, the author is dead, inasmuch as authors have no control over the meaning of their words once they are out in the world, then a technology that takes on the role of temporary author is not especially disturbing. And if, as postmodernists suggest, the preferred type of writing is bricolage, pastiche, montage, and parody, or collating bits and pieces and copying other writers with comic intent, then ChatGPT reflects those values. It is fed works written by other authors, copies elements of their grammar, style, and structure, and cuts bits and pieces of information from hither and thither to form a finished text. Economists might say this is a way for late capitalism to commodify and monetize information, and they're right about that. It is much easier to make money on digital than physical products, so ChatGPT is a potential windfall for the information industry. But since late capitalism, by its very nature, tends to consume and commodify even its opposition by such acts as greenwashing or spiritual cleansing, several theorists are often quite pessimistic about what can be done to change a system that privileges and benefits from the surface and the superficial over the deep and meaningful. The questions and answers that Christians might raise in the face of this dilemma, intensified by ChatGPT, in which language becomes no more than surface or superficial information, or data that can be sliced, diced, bought, and sold, sometimes intersects with and sometimes diverges from that raised by secular theorists. However, Christian thinkers tend to turn to ontology, the fancy word for being, and ethics when weighing what is gained and lost when using technologies such as ChatGPT. The first impulse of many of us in both secular and faith-based communities might be that AI technologies such as ChatGPT are value-free or morally neutral technologies that can be used for good or evil. They are no different from the scroll, the pen, the printing press, the personal computer, and so on. However, all of these technologies are also value-laden and produce what Martin Heidegger calls a kind of enframing. As Walter Ong claimed some time ago, the technologies that moved us from oral culture to chirographic or writing cultures, first manuscript, and then to print and digital culture, also shift our way of knowing and being in the world. They enframed it in a radically different way. Some Christian theorists, such as Ivan Illich and Barry Sanders, view the original shift away from morality as radically devaluing language because, for example, it became detached from the speaker and the event from which the language emerged. And over time, alphabetic letters became equated with bits of information and reduced to a code. Illich and Sanders deride the idea that the terms by which we describe the operations of computers are fit to tell us what is going on between you and me, and they equate technical word factories with industrial pollution. In the Technological Society, the Christian sociologist and philosopher Jacques Ellul explains that a technological framework, very broadly defined, has already penetrated the deepest recesses of our human being. The machine, he believes, tends not only to create a new human environment, but also to modify humans' very essence. Ellul uses the word technique instead of technology to explain that technology is but an expression and byproduct of the underlying reliance on technique, on the proceduralization whereby everything is organized and managed to function most efficiently and directed toward the most expedient end of the highest productivity, as James Fowler explains. Though Ellul was writing well before the invention of ChatGPT, which I consider an expression and byproduct of technique, his conclusion seems aptly applied to it. After all, even the owner of the company that built ChatGPT claims that AI technology transforms the way people learn and how people interact with the world, clearly in the interest of efficiency, expediency, and productivity. I'm sorry, it's so hard to say those words. For Christians, transformation is a powerful term. In 2 Corinthians 5:17, we are told that if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. And in Romans 12:2, we read, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Or we might think of the metaphor of the self subjected to the refiner's fire in the Old Testament. Just as a refiner's fire, God will draw out our dross so that we will stand pure and righteous before him. This type of transformation involves restoration to wholeness and holiness. The theologian John Piper, citing Romans 1:21-23, emphasized that it means that transformation, true transformation, means no longer being futile in our thinking, as well as abandoning false images for the glory of the immortal God. We must undertake, he says, a renovation of the soul's capacity to feel as well as to think. In the rest of this talk, I will explore whether the transformation that an AI such as ChatGPT entails can coincide with the transformation that we read about in Scripture, or whether its use is simply a way to conform to worldly values, whether intentional or not. I'll let you absorb that while I drink a little sip of water. If you look up Christianity and ChatGPT on Google, which also uses artificial intelligence, there has been a remarkably positive response to this new technology. Many pastors, priests, theologians, and missionaries suggest regular use for a great many tasks, including sermons, but then they qualify their application of the technology by defining its limitations. As a case in point, Suman Kumar Pulepaka, the founder of BibleMate, claims that AI chatbots offer instant, clear, and authoritative responses compiled from a vast array of textbooks and articles. Their convenience, speed, and interactive nature make them a go-to resource. They can even enhance personal Bible study by providing instant, diverse interpretations and context for any passage. He then paradoxically claims that one of the technology's limitations is that ChatGPT may lack theological or biblical accuracy, a slight problem, and fails to foster personal relationships with God or nurture spiritual growth. But he has the solution for that. His BibleMate.org is a ChatGPT alternative that will always provide the right answers and contribute meaningfully to spiritual growth. Who knew that there were right answers in biblical interpretation? Some of the words privileged in Pulepaka's response to ChatGPT are instant, speed, and convenience. And these and related words surface in the feedback on ChatGPT of many who write about it, including Christians. The Christian firm Shepherd's Wealth Partners declares that, from a positive standpoint, ChatGPT has the potential to increase efficiency and productivity, two of the words that make English professors' toes curl. Here is the very language of technique that Alul warns us against, as does our own philosophy professor, Dr. Bob Doty, who writes that in our excitement over technological advances, we fail to recognize how technologies subtly but inevitably remake their users in their own image, and that we are on our way, as Dr. Doty says, to exchanging a birthmark for a trademark. A brilliant thought, I have to say. We might ask, whose interests are served by putting a premium value on the instant, speed, convenience, productivity, and efficiency, and who and what are diminished in the process? And how do these values relate to those found in Scripture? Many Christians writers have suggested that all we need is the discernment, wisdom, and spiritual depth to properly use this and similar AI technologies. But are we more likely to become the master or slave of a technology like ChatGPT? If the latter is the case, won't this form of AI slowly erode the very discernment, wisdom, and spiritual depth needed to use technology appropriately? Let us consider, okay, don't get scared, students. Let us consider as an example uses of ChatGPT in the academic context. Already, some students at Trinity Western University have been using it to speed read, summarize, assimilate passages from, and produce written texts. Obviously, if they knowingly submit work produced by ChatGPT as their own, this is clearly antithetical to Christian virtues in that they are, for starters, engaging in sloth and bearing false witness. However, this is but one of the problems of this act to my mind. By using ChatGPT in this way, students also choose to bypass imaging forth their own perceptions, understandings, and representations of the world and its meaning in response to that which has been brought forth or imagined by past thinkers and writers, from philosophers, theologians, and sociologists to poets and novelists. In such cases, they diminish an aspect of their essence, at least as Christians understand it, as image bearers of God. In her brand new book, I really recommend it to you, The Evangelical Imagination, Karen Swallow Prior describes this facet of human beings thus: the ability of the human mind to imagine, to make images that have meaning, reflects the marvelous fact that we are made in the image of God. We are the product of his imagination in a very literal as well as metaphorical sense. Samuel Taylor Coleridge characterizes the imaginative act as a repetition in the finite mind of the eternal act of creation in the infinite I am. So the imaginative act is a repetition in the finite mind of the eternal act of creation in the infinite I am. In response to such a claim, it has been argued that technology is itself a product of the creative imagination, and there is truth in this statement. The inventors of ChatGPT no doubt engaged in imaging forth their generative AI. However, their very act of subcreation, as Tolkien might call it, paradoxically inhibits subcreation in its users, which is of course not true of all forms of technology, hence the need for technological understanding and discernment. What is particularly painful is that our sacrifice of these powers of subcreation bring little in return, despite the rhetoric of techno-humanists who claim that they can upgrade the human mind. As a historian, Yuval Noah Harari explains in Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow. Although ChatGPT claims to be modeled on human language, its form of intelligence, and therefore the language it produces, has no relation to embodied human experience. The philosophers Hans-Georg Gadamer and Richard Carney, Jens Zimmerman reminds us, theorized the inextricable relationship between sensation and interpretation. And the psychiatrist, Dr. Michael Robbins, points out the fundamental difference between the intelligence that chatbots create and the intelligence created by the human mind, when he writes that chatbot intelligence is an abstraction of mind and knowledge, amputated from the primary human data of bodily feelings and emotions on the one hand, and from sensory perceptual awareness of the external world on the other. Robbins wrote this comment in response to the linguist Noam Chomsky's opinion piece in the New York Times that adamantly insists that ChatGPT is not capable to generate human-like language and thought. As he proclaims, the human mind is not like ChatGPT and its ilk, a lumbering statistical engine for pattern matching, gorging on hundreds of terabytes of data, and extrapolating the most likely response or most probable answer. On the contrary, the human mind seeks not to infer brute correlations among data points, but to create authentic explanations. If Robbins and Chomsky are correct, we sacrifice our godlike ability to image forth to a lumbering, disembodied statistical engine for pattern making or matching. It is not only, however, the act of subcreation we forfeit each time we turn to this new technology. There's also the benefits of the act of reading. Can you lift up that orange book there? If you want to read more, Catherine, on reading well, Prior has written a volume recently on that as well. The act of reading or interpretation we abandon in turning to ChatGPT or similar technologies. Reading is pivotal in myriad ways to our health as humans. Study after study demonstrates that it strengthens memory, increases general knowledge on vocabulary, helps diminish stress and depression, increases social cognition and empathy, and improves the ability to concentrate. However, there are more lyrical ways to describe the critical role played by reading. The novelist Joyce Carol Oates writes, for example, that reading is the sole means by which we slip involuntarily, often helplessly, into another's skin, another's voice, another's soul. And C.S. Lewis concludes, those of us who have been true readers all our life seldom fully realize the enormous extension of our being which we owe to authors. In reading great literature, I become 1,000 men and yet remain myself. Here, as in worship, in love, in moral action, and in knowing, I transcend myself and am never more myself when I do. While there is evidence that reading literature proper, such as fiction, is most likely to achieve this end, all reading to some extent strengthens the self's relation to the other, and thereby takes us closer to loving our neighbors as ourselves. However, this type of reading we need to engage in is what the literary critic Frank Kermode called some time ago spiritual reading, and he's not even a Christian, by which he meant penetrating reading, rather than carnal reading, which Pryor calls hurried utilitarian information processing. Here, Kermode spiritualizes the ideal reading process. If we read deeply and sensitively and spiritually, as Kermode would have it, especially the works of those who have also read deeply, our own writing will be like solid food rather than watery milk in Pauline terms. Our own writing often lacks depth and insight because it is not grounded in the cumulative knowledge and wisdom developed over centuries. And ChatGPT offers the most carnal type of reading possible. In both the Old and New Testament, the importance of reading, whether orally or reading aloud or of a written text, in a religious context is highlighted. It is an aid to memory, a source of instruction, and a vehicle of hope. As Paul writes in Romans 15:4, for whatever was written in earlier times was written for our instruction, so that through perseverance and the encouragement of the scriptures, we might have hope. The importance of this kind of reading that involves chewing on and sucking the marrow of texts is central to Midrash in the Hebraic tradition, which Christians have inherited. It is such reading and interpretive practices that aid in the journey towards knowledge, truth, understanding, and wisdom, all scriptural values, which we can then image forth in our writing. I am suggesting, therefore, that AI technologies like ChatGPT are far more threatening to human nature and the human condition than might at first seem apparent, especially if we think of their long-term consequences. Not only are they novel threats to human intelligence, as the philosopher Jeremy Wiseman proclaims, they are likely to fundamentally alter the nature of our modes of communication and our very being, since self-generated language is intrinsic to our identity as self-reflective and relational or interpersonal beings. I believe that this type of technological change will ultimately render us less than fully human, or in evolutionary terms, will cause us to devolve. This type of technology will cause us to forget ourselves, as Steve Talbot writes, causing us to, quote, descend to the level of the computational devices we have engineered. If you think of the 2008 prophetic animated film WALL-E, who's seen WALL-E? If you haven't, I really recommend it. This WALL-E often comes to my mind when reflecting on the future. You might recall all of the interchangeable, bloated, literally thoughtless humans who spend their day floating around on hoverboards on a spaceship doing nothing but consuming digital content mindlessly. I'm not accusing anyone here personally. What may be even more frightening, however, is that ChatGPT and similar technologies are not alien entities external to us, but potentially self-harming tools that emerge from our being. So what is the solution to the problem of writing in the age of AI? AI technologies are not going away, and they're likely to continue to impact our language practices. Theologians such as Michael D. Langford, who's at Seattle Pacific University, in the recent collection, AI, Faith, and the Future, which I also recommend, although I disagree with some of it, he suggests that we do not panic and that we see both humans and AI as part of God's good creation. AI, he claims, is apocalyptic, not in the terrifying sense, but in the sense that it reveals to us that within our good creation, humans continue to discover and build novel means to empower and extend our capabilities, which can bring about both blessings and curses. Although Langford contends that, like post-lapsarian humans, sin is bound up in the materiality of AI, he theorizes that AI might well also house the actualization of God's grace. He concludes that what we need to do is to ensure, at least in the life of a Christian, that AI serves as, quote, a mediator of God's faithfulness to humanity, and that it helps humanity to be a faithful covenantal partner to God, thereby fulfilling its mandate for existence. While I appreciate Langford's optimism, his beliefs that AI is intrinsically good, though prone like humans to sin, is questionable. That humans have the necessary clarity, autonomy, and agency to control and shape how AI mediates spiritual understanding, while somehow remaining apart from our discernment of what God has for us and how it should change us, seems naive. I believe that the thinking of Elul and Illich, experts in systems, is more helpful since they understand the way that technique and its technological offspring intersect to serve a greater master and shift our entire perception and experience of the world, our place in it, and of our relationship with the divine. I would suggest following their directives that we must gain a clear understanding of the nature, values, modes of operation, inframing power, and profound impact of a given technology within the broader system, recognizing that human life, experiences, and expression always exceeds any system imposed on it. We need to be able to distinguish, as Illich and Elul wrote, between types of technology or our tools. As Illich warns, anybody who wants to use the term machine to designate a pen, a watch, a steam engine, or a motor, and a computer as beasts of the same kind hasn't understood what has happened and has no capacity to understand what has happened. A little mean, I think. Next, we must weigh the hefty cost on our humanity of using each new technology, resisting whenever possible the erosion of our human selves in the fullness of our being. In the arena of language in particular, we must also, as Marilyn McIntyre writes in, could you show this one? Is it up there? Oh yes, the caring. As Marilyn McIntyre writes in Caring for Words in a Culture of Lies, we must steward words and the silences between them. If, quote, if language is to retain its power to nourish and sustain our common life, just as, quote, good farmers care for the life of the soil. Our language practices, that is, should reflect the sacramental view of the enfleshed word we find in Scripture, a view undermined by ChatGPT. ChatGPT is therefore more than a plague upon education, as Weissman laments. It is a plague upon the essence of who we were originally made to be as intellectual, imaginative, moral, and social enfleshed beings made in the image of God. In the words of C.S. Lewis, this may lead to nothing less than the abolition of man.
Thank you. That was amazing. I was just reminded as you were presenting that part of St. Augustine's conversion experience was observing St. Ambrose reading silently. And he describes people not bothering him in his pastorate because he was reading so intently that they knew that he was really serious, so don't bother him, he's busy. And that's pretty much every pastor and intellectual's dream, is to convert people with the power of their silent reading. But thank you for your presentation. There's so much that warrants engagement, and I wish I could pull at every enticing thread in what you've shared. I only have time to pick 2 related fibers that piqued my interest before we move to the discussion portion of the symposium. Both of the threads appear at the end of your essay, but I think they represent well the threads woven throughout. So first, you call for a critical examination of the nature, values, modes of operation in framing, power, and profound impact of any given technology, including AI and machine learning technologies like ChatGPT within the broader system in which all of us are embedded. Second, you call for a constructive appraisal of language practices that should reflect the sacramental view of the word. That's a lowercase w, and then a capital W word. We find in Scripture a view undermined by ChatGPT. And I'm compelled by this critical description of this system and your constructive call for a sacramental view of the word. So I want to ask 3 related questions and then offer a few subsequent wonderings to provoke further discussion. And we really do look forward to the time of discussion, because that's where the real magic happens. So my first question is this: what is it about the system to which you refer that you think provokes movement away from a sacramental view of the word? My second question is as follows: in light of what you think provokes this movement, what can be done to move more people towards a sacramental view of the word? And then finally, my third question: what would you expect to see if more of a movement towards the sacramental view of the word happened? So in asking these questions, I want to bring into view existential reflections that illumine the ontological and ethical considerations that you note, that Christians often turn to when weighing what is gained and lost when using technologies such as ChatGPT. And I think, for the record, you did a wonderful job of that. So nothing to add, nothing to subtract. Well done. Not that you need my appraisal, but just saying.
Consecrate me.
Yes. Actually, well, as an Elul scholar, you represented him well. So, yes, he'd be pleased that we're using technology to subvert technology today. So, yeah. So this is to ask, and it's to summarize the 3 questions I asked just a moment ago. What is it about our existence today that you think predisposes us to be drawn towards the ontology and ethics of technologies like ChatGPT and away from the ontology and ethics of the sacraments essential to the Christian faith? And your work really provoked that in me, so thank you. Posing the question in this way, for me, the word idolatry initially comes up, informed by scriptures like the first chapter in the letter of Paul to the Romans, which you mentioned. And there we read, "Ever since the creation of the world, God's eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things he has made. So those who suppress the truth are without excuse, for though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. But they became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling a mortal human being or birds or 4-footed animals or reptiles. So, if truth suppressors in the past have exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling finite humans or animals, could it be said the current truth suppressors are making the exchange with intelligent machines, including those who profess Christian faith? So if I'm reading you correctly, you think this is a possibility, and if you do think this is a possibility, then we agree. Our enchantment with the technological systems we've produced often spill over into idolatrous worship that turns us away from the sacraments that shape Christian worship. Then, because of this misdirected worship, our ontology and our ethics are warped, and dangerously so. So if that's the case, what do you think would happen if we reached out to receive such sacraments despite the fear and trembling we experience in thinking such thoughts as I am here? But lest I forget Jesus' words in Matthew 7, verse 2, "With the judgment you make, you will be judged, and the measure you give will be the measure you get." it's important for me to consider with self-awareness, empathy, and compassion the existential reasons for enchantment with quote-unquote intelligent technologies and the kinds of warped and dangerous worship it can produce. So creating time and space for these considerations, here is what I concluded. It is a fearful thing to ponder the significance of the sacraments God offers us. And it's fearful to imagine what might happen if we received them in more worshipful earnest, because we might lose control of ourselves and our surroundings. So out of fear, we turn to what is familiar and what seems to offer control of ourselves and our surroundings. Even in the short, medium, and long term, they're poor, often damaging substitutes for the out-of-control sacraments of the Word become flesh in our midst, Jesus Christ, Emmanuel, God with us. But what brought me to this conclusion, strangely enough, initially was not a scripture passage or a proper theologian. I put proper in quotes there. It was the words of the late and lapsed Pentecostal writer, activist, and humanist James Baldwin in an article he wrote for Time magazine in 1963 called "The Doom and Glory of Knowing Who You Are." In that essay, Baldwin writes the following, quote, "You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read. It was Dostoevsky and Dickens who taught me that the things that tormented me most were the very things that connected me with all the people who are alive or who ever had been alive. Only if we face these open wounds in ourselves can we understand them in other people. An artist is a sort of emotional or spiritual historian. His role is to make you realize the doom and glory of knowing who you are and what you are. He has to tell because nobody else can tell what it is like to be alive." So in short, do you think what terrifies us about the sacramental qualities of words and the Word of God and what causes us to turn from the synthetic words of technologies like ChatGPT is that the former reveals so much more fully how pained, heartbroken, tormented, and wounded all of us really are? And that it is this, not our flawless, content, serene, and synthetic selves and technologies that really connect us with the world we are in and the people that populate it. Do you think people are quite literally terrified to read and write in the way Baldwin writes here? Dare I say sacramentally? Do you think the wounded Word of God and the sacraments he offers to the world, along with their ontologies and ethics, terrifies the world because it calls the world to lose its life so that it might find it? If so, what do you think would happen if we reached out to receive such sacraments despite the fear and trembling we experience in thinking such thoughts as I am here? And I could share scripture passages and quotes from noteworthy theologians to reinforce what Baldwin describes in the passage I shared and the questions I derive from it, but I'll hold back on sharing such passages and quotes for now. I do so in hopes that what I've shared will move us broader and deeper in our reflections on the sacramental qualities of the lowercase w word, which are born out of the sacramental qualities of the capital W word, Jesus Christ, the enfleshed Word of God. Thanks, Holly.
I'll try to keep my response to your response to a minimum. I would begin with citing Bob Doty. He has a wonderful article in which he argues that one of the reasons that we're drawn towards the technology is this nostalgic desire for that perfect prelapsarian re-enchantment. So we can go back into the sort of perfect world, and a lot of the technologies, especially where we become kind of cyborg-like, that will allow us to become, sort of return to the perfect state in many ways. And of course, that's a lie, and it's delusional. But of course, who wouldn't want to think that? You know, there's that fantasy that's caught up with it. You also might think of Plato's in the cave, you know, the famous metaphor that we feel comfortable in the cave. When you go out and you see the bright light, it seems like darkness. So when you see the light of Christ, you know, that's so overwhelming, so awesome. Just like Moses, when he took, off his shoes and then he had to hide his face from God, it's so wonder, amazement, awe, so above all things that it's much easier to go into this kind of shadowy world where everything that you desire will be given to you, at least desire on the bodily level, as a shadow of what you really want. I think of the vision that Ezekiel has. Remember the wheels within wheels? that the bad system is like an anti sort of wheels within wheels. Once you're sort of sucked in to get pleasure, immediacy, all your sexual desire, it could be fulfilled by pornography. Why bother about a sacramental relationship with someone? That's a lot of work. So just look at the pornography. Or why read and think and lament over trying to write an essay when you can just quickly, you have ChatGPT do it for you. And once you enter the wheels within wheels, the anti-wheels within wheels, you can't get out. It's very hard to get out. So even if you get a phone, how many of you don't have a cell phone? We got one person, that didn't. And even though most of us, including me, have one, we know they're listening to us. They're following us. They advertise to us as soon as we answer we say, oh, I wish I had a caramel bar. All of a sudden, caramel is coming up. We are willing to sacrifice huge amounts of our privacy, security, and so forth, so we can have the immediacies. So it's very much like an opiate effect on us once we enter the wheels within wheels, and trying to move towards another system that really makes us lay bare ourselves. Any of you ever really looked into yourselves? Like really looked? It's horrifying. If you actually look into the wickedness within yourself, your potential for evil, it terrifies you. And you don't want to, who wants to do that? Now, the solution is to get married. Because at first, when you're dating, you mirror the perfect image of each other. You're like, oh, he's so handsome, she's so beautiful, and you're just, oh, it's fabulous. And then as you go along, what marriage should do, because it's a sacrament, is actually purge things out of you, cleanse you. But that is very painful. So the person will start, I've been married 36 years and have made 36, slowly the person will mirror what's wrong with you to them. And they'll mirror it back. And it's hard to get past that, but you keep on working, you don't give up. And so who wants to face that? No one's going to say, yes, sign me up. It's for this hard, but that's what we're called to do as Christians. We're called to sign up for that, over the true wheels within wheels, not the anti-wheels within wheels. So that's my first question. Your second question was, what can we do to move closer to the sacramental view of the world? For me, I think it might be helpful to go back to a kind of a medieval view of the book of scripture and the book of nature. Have you heard those terms? A lot of you might. Where scripture and the natural world are both, the fancy word is semiotic systems, which just means they sign to you. And these semiotic systems sign the transcendent to us. So we're looking at them and they're immanent in the earth, but then they are pointing towards the transcendent being and transcendent values and beliefs. And so to me, it's critical to be in nature and to immerse yourself in scripture, and also in order to move towards the sacramental. This is going to be controversial, what I say. I would have added that going to church and enjoying the sacraments together. But I would only say that if your church is not part of the system. I cannot tell you how many churches I go into that I feel are just part of the anti-wheels within wheels system. What is the major desire? Money, so that you can pay everybody. And what can we have a big giant screen? So we don't need to worry about feeding the poor. We can buy this $10,000 organ instead, because that's very holy for us. And so I would argue that if you can find a place of worship in which you really see the people, the way that they live, trying, even if they don't to reach the transcendent, trying to find God as a higher being, I would also recommend that. And the last thing I would argue is, what would the world look like if everybody sort of had a sacramental way of life? I'll just say a few little things. Firstly, we'd have a whole different way of conceiving the world and speaking the world into existence for ourselves. So our language would be different, and how we conceive. So for example, I looked up the word efficiency in the dictionary. Do you know what I thought, well, the antonym could be lots of things, but what is the antonym, do you think? That means the opposite. Yeah, chaos. Yeah, the word that comes a little bit close actually to it. It's incompetence. So the world is teaching us with that single word: if you refuse to be efficient, you're incompetent. So you have to see how language shapes how you see the world, the concepts, and we have to fight against that. So we would have a different language, we would have a different sort of conceptual, a model of conception. I would expect, this is like my wish, like dream. I would think there'd be a world in which money and power were not prioritized. It would invert. Money would be seen as maybe something useful that we need it for bartering or exchange, but caritas, love and compassion would be at the top of this sacramental world. And unfortunately, even in many, many Christian communities, it's the other way around. And we really have to choose to live differently if we want to live in a sacramental way. I also think that in the sacramental world, we would have a much closer connection with other beings, and other beings we might not like to hang out with, like the homeless people, right? With people with mental illnesses. So all the different people that are maybe have some kind of dis/ability in some way or the other. All the people that we kind of feel uncomfortable with. That we would feel this as Martin, now I've forgotten his last name, Buber, good, it was Martin Buber might say, is the I-thou relationship. Rather than seeing them as objects, uncomfortable objects, that we have this intersubjectivity and connection with them. And finally, I would say that to live a sacramental existence, we need to always be moving towards the eternal thou. And what we do in this earth, and that's from Buber as well, what we do in this earth does gesture to the eternal thou or not, right? Love of money is the root of all evil. Not money, the love of money. So think, how many sermons do you hear on greed? Right? But the gay people, they're really bad. Keep them out. But money, yeah, we don't need to talk about money, right? So what are we preaching on? And are we preaching on subjects that don't affect us, so we don't have to look internally at ourselves? So I'll end with a quotation from Buber. In every sphere in its own way, through each process of becoming that is present to us, we look out toward the fringe of the eternal thou. In each we are aware of a breath from the eternal thou. In each thou, we address the eternal thou.
So now is an opportunity to respond to these wonderful presentations. And so I welcome questions from the floor and also from our online community. And I have one question waiting already here online, so I'll get it going with that. And then please feel free to just gesture and I'll catch you.
And you can ask any of us. Dr. Bubel also happens to be an expert in this subject matter, so you can ask any of the three of us.
Yeah, I was planning on
I'm a
putting you
fellow
on the spot.
inquirer. Not an expert. So Corey Shoemaker online, one of your former students, as a professor working at Trinity Western University and dealing with plagiarism cases, etc., how would you encourage professors to encourage students to embrace intelligent thought instead of using ChatGPT? I have so many students who are so focused on doing assignments quickly, efficiency, instant speed and productivity. They don't value the journey of learning. If they need to just graduate, how do we inspire them to learn? How can we encourage learning that is struggling with text and coming up with your own ideas instead of copying or letting AI take over? Sloth and laziness, to quote you, versus inspiring the joy of learning and challenging yourself despite the mark you might receive.
That is a great question from a former English master's and undergraduate students. And you two might have other answers, but I would say I handle these things in two ways. Firstly, I am very sympathetic with students. If you went back and tried to be an undergraduate student, I don't know if any of you remember if you did that. I was crying constantly, crying and crying. I'm not exaggerating, because you were supposed to somehow, in 13 weeks, read everything for the courses, and while you were reading everything, try to write at the same time. So there's already a system in place that makes it very difficult for students. Most students, I find, do not plagiarize out of, they're thumbing their nose at us. They are often really anxious, really afraid, really stressed out, and so we shouldn't think of it as us versus them, trying to force them into morality. For me, I think it's coming alongside and helping. So I have actually done more and more in class, especially with first year students who are most likely to plagiarize, and just have them write in class. And I personally mark differently. I say, well, this is an in-class assignment and you're writing this way, and so I don't have the same expectations. And sort of allow the students to explore their own gifts. I have reading aloud in class. So instead of just asking the students, go and read this thing, I say, well, let's do it together. And so I think we should be working, the I, thou in the classroom in order to build up a kind of resilience so that people aren't as afraid. I also am, now this is controversial, I'm not a big fan of punitive treatment of students. I would rather, if I saw a student plagiarize something, I would rather they rewrote it without without any sources. And maybe they come to my office and they rewrite a version of it there. We use a very punitive model. It tends to be based on copyright laws in the West. And in other cultures, there's different views towards plagiarism and copyright and so forth. And so we have to take into account some of the cultural differences with the students that we're teaching as well. That doesn't mean we allow people to use ChatGPT and to write their assignments, unless we say, use ChatGPT for your assignment, and now write an essay on everything that it did wrong. And some of my friends do that. So they show its limitations of ChatGPT that way. Do you guys have anything to add?
Do you want to?
I feel like you probably have experience. I have things I could share, but I'd love to hear from you.
Well, thank you for that invitation. The thing that comes to my mind is that we're being invited. This is a moment of invitation for us to change how we teach. And if it's apocalyptic, I disagree profoundly with Michael Langford about his understanding of this apocalyptic moment, but I see it as revealing the increasingly disincarnate way in which we structure higher learning. I don't know high school and elementary school, but...
And disincarnate is taking off sort of the body, the flesh. Yeah.
Speaking of incarnate words, a disincarnating of it. And so I am feeling stirred in my heart to be responsive more the way that you've put it in the classroom, to pay attention to the stress levels, to recognize that people are working, many of the students are working more than one job. So change, and we've been encouraged in our Department of English to be more human about how much reading we're expecting the students to do if we want it to be meaningful, deep. I also take exception with the antithesis of spiritual versus carnal reading. I think we want both. We want deep as in spiritual and carnal or incarnate reading. We need to build that into our expectations of the students and what they can accomplish in a semester. And so it's an apocalyptic revelation moment for teachers of any level of how do we view this vocation that we are called to? Is it to deliver a product, education, or is it to be fellow journeyers into, as Corey called it, the learning journey? Is it to be pilgrims together and to recognize that learning is it's incarnate. It's not an abstraction. It is deeply incarnate. So that would be my response.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, because it really actually gets to the heart of why I thought this would be a topic worth exploring for this symposium. I mean, the existential crisis that's been provoked among academics and those of us whose vocation is to research, read, write, and speak, like if you can't make a living out of that, like what are we good for, right? And in thinking a lot about technology is that it can often seem really intimidating off the top, that it's new, like never before have we ever dealt with these questions before. But actually, once you drill down a little bit deeper and get beyond the panic, you realize we've been asking questions like this for quite some time. Maybe it's just being nuanced in a different way. So what I think this does is actually really emerge a question that maybe those of us in the humanities have neglected for quite some time, including those of us who teach and research, is like, what's the point? Like, why do we write? Why do we read? And I realized pretty quickly that if the best response I can give to that question is because it's just what you do, or because I think it's fun and so should you, that's not a compelling enough answer. So then it's an opportunity to rediscover like why we do this, and then thinking there, like, how do we help guide other people into these types of wondrous discoveries that we're all sharing. Like the Baldwin Code, like that's something I read a while back and it just emerged in my, and like the Joyce Carol Oates or the C.S. Lewis, like we read to feel less alone, like that sort of idea. And so it just really presses an opportunity to like re-examine, like, why do we bother doing this? And then actually leading with that in the way that we shepherd students. And when it becomes apparent that a student has used these technologies, and like if you read enough, you can kind of tell at this point, because it can seem very clinical and very overly technical, and then if you're looking at the sources, it leads often to like very strange things. It'll cite this amazing journal and then it takes you at a journal that's totally different. And I teach anywhere from first year undergrads to doctor of ministry students. And I've seen it at all levels. And there are technologies out there that will, operate like scanning. Sometimes they miss it, sometimes they pick it up, but sometimes you get a false positive. So I have people who use things like Grammarly or other language softwares because English is not their heart language. So then you're getting a flag, and then you have to have a conversation with the student to say, hey, I got a 70% chance with 3 of the 5 tools that you've used this. Like, let's have a conversation. But it's not punitive. It's, can we go out for coffee? Can we talk? Like, how are you doing? Are you stressed in this high cost of living city? You're probably working full time. Maybe you have a family. You're trying to get things done. If you're not writing, in your heart language, like all of that pressure. And I think that's actually an opportunity for transformation, right? Because, if we were to go around and talk about why we are where we are today, I'm sure all of us could mention teachers that could have totally, taken us to the guillotine or the electric chair, but didn't. And we can also talk about ones that were really terrible too and discouraged us, but the ones who noticed us and encouraged us even when we messed up. So I think it really just actually reintroduces the importance of like the real vocational elements of teaching. So that would be what I would add. But I mean, it probably is going to happen, and that's the real thing, is have the conversation. Yeah.
Can I add one more thought? Because there's someone in this room that was once a professor to me. There's a few people in this room that were once professors to me. And I would like to bring out the word that somewhere in your presentation was the word play. And I am so grateful that professors, one in particular, allowed me to play with big thoughts that were larger than me, with a certain poet from Britain that was impenetrable at the beginning, and that recognition for the need for processing, and not just giving me that's a B paper or whatever. You've failed to logically frame this. It allowed me to play and to be in process and rewrite. That is part of. That should be an option for our students. I really believe that we need play more. Yeah. Any other questions from the floor? Or there is an HN, it's not you, saying, I would also add that for so many students, AI grants a shortcut in their quest for the right answer. Okay, this is very good. The right answer, aka what students think their professors want, especially for those who struggle with English proficiency. AI is the new Google. I have emphasized the process of writing along with many fine professors in the room on Zoom to steer them away from simply writing down, quote, the right answer. That is a really good point. That is a value that has emerged in this age of systems, is what you were saying, efficiency versus incompetence.
Yes, exactly.
A right answer, a certainty versus thinking and process.
Exactly. We have a member in the audience who has both a background in IT, but he also has studied theology. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the paper, if you thought that I was off and maybe Langford was more correct, or somewhere in the middle.
My theology surrounding ChatGPT is, and the only thing I can come up with is Diablo ex machina, the machine, because we'll go to Tolkien and the Silmarillion. Eru creates everything. He puts a manager over it. The being that's evil can't create. It's beyond them to create. They can only make a mockery of what was created. Have we taken our first steps to making a mockery of creation?
That's a very good point.
Because it's not conscious yet. But there is definitely, in the future with quantum computing, the possibility. And then you get to the old joke. They design the machine, they turn it on. Is there a God? And it answers, there is now.
Well, thank you so much for that. It's terrifying, but accurate. I think.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think it's really important to specify that there's a difference between machine sentience and machine learning, right? And oftentimes artificial intelligence is used to describe the machine learning taking place, like machines reading massive data sets. That's just processing large quantities of information, some of which is good, some of which is bad. But we're not at the point now where the quantities are such that there's like qualitative sentient thinking in the way that we think of human sentience. And that's why I think it's helpful even just in the language use of like machine learning versus AI, because once you say artificial intelligence, then we're thinking Terminator and all the sci-fi things. But I remember someone asking, what's your favorite AI story? And I said, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. That was so ahead of its time. Like, be careful what you create, because it might actually lament its own creation and also might really cause some problems. So again, like thinking about it that way, this is not necessarily a new question that we've been asking, but this is pushing the question in a different way.
Exactly. And well, I should mention that Alul and Elich both say that they're not technophobes, and I'm not a technophobe. I create websites. I probably do more technology things than anyone in the department, and I have a long history of that. Even HTML, I created, pages, and so it wasn't HTML. What was it? Was it? Am I right? Oh, good. I just wanted to check. It's so long ago. But so this is not a technophobia. It's looking at different technologies and understanding the difference between technologies and the consequence of each technology and how it's working within a whole broader system of thought and praxis. And then you can make a reasoned decision about it. Dwight, did you have a?
I do have a question. Thank you, and I appreciate all of your comments. I'm not quite sure how to frame this, so I'm just gonna, because I've been reflecting. I'm with you, by the way, on I think we need to pay attention. Marshall McLuhan said that faith is paying attention. And so there's a dynamic that's, I think that's really, really key. And I try to encourage people to do that. As I was thinking about it, though, and this thought had never crossed my mind precisely in this way before, but Years ago, when I was about 8, I had the privilege of trying to help someone who was about 80 learn to read for the very first time. And it occurred to me, as I was thinking about this now, to think, how did writing transform the human? And I'm wondering if you have any commentary on that, because I'm sure there are people within the sources. And I just haven't, I know McLuhan has some thoughts, but I'm thinking just from a very deeply kind of experiential perspective, how you think that affected our ability to be sacramental.
I'll say a brief response, and then I'll turn it to Catherine on this. You want to go to Walter Ong. Walter Ong theorizes this. I'm just trying to remember. I've totally forgot. It's in my notes.
Morality and literacy.
Thank you. Orality and literacy. It's an old book. He was a Jesuit priest. There's so many brilliant Jesuit priest scholars, but he actually talked about what happened as we switched, and Illich, of course, laments it, and because he's seeing if you focus on oral culture, you have to be with the people incarnate to share the information. You value the coming together of the embodied self fully. And so when you turn to writing, then your written word can replace either one or both of you, for example, in manuscript or in print or digital. And therefore you have this incredible loss. That causes you then to think of knowledge in a different way, for example. So Indigenous people have a strong oral tradition. You have to be together. You have to say, I come from this land, you come from this area, and introduce yourself. Now, of course, Indigenous people now use technologies, but that tradition, and then pre-written sort of early cultural tradition, they would have thought of knowledge as passing on from person to person, a parent to child in the home, how to bake, for example. But now you just look it up. When I want to make pumpkin bread recently, I just looked up pumpkin bread. So I don't phone. So you don't need to have that intergenerational connectedness with another person to know something. So it totally changes how you operate in the world.
I would add what I've taken from Illich is that there was a time where writing and reading was far more embodied, and he said that the scriptorium would be a buzz like a hive of bees, because they were actually ruminating orally on the word even as they were reading. And so he argues in his genealogy of this, he argues that it was a far more incarnate activity. It was actually rigorous. It was one of the practices that was meant to inform you as a way of life, and that the codifying, the reduction of language to this code, and we slip so easily into calling it the system when language is so much more than system, but it's become reductively thought of that way. And so he refers to the codification or the mathematization. He's borrowing, Professor Doty, this is a bit embarrassing having you sitting there.
I know, he knows everything. He's all-knowing. So
our hardened chat pal over there, but I would love to hear what you have to say about this if you want to chime in. But just, I know what Illich would say is that it was not the written word in itself that was the problem. It was the codification and the systematizing and regulating, and then it became more and more, even our consciousness was restricted to certain anticipations of value, so that it was just a shift in value systems as well. Would you like to add anything?
Sure. Maybe just two little things. One would be just the movement into writing, and you are touched upon this, but towards an individualist self-understanding where you can interact with an object, a text, and that's really all you need. The relationship to other people, the incarnate communal dimensions, and what all can start to drop away, and like you said, turn to a book turned to today, self-help book. You don't need your grandparents. You don't need all this kind of stuff. But the other thing that it does is it leads you to think that you don't need a person to have meaning. And I think that's one of the most important kind of effects of looking at, black on white text. And you begin to think the meaning is in that. And you begin to think that you can objectify meaning and pass it along. And, the human's incidental to it.
But one good thing is that there's always traces of pre-cultures. So you don't have to give up. Just because we're in a digital culture, and I think Bob Doty would agree with me, that who writes letters, handwritten letters still? Sometimes I do. Oh, see? More of us now. We still have manuscript culture. Who goes out with their friends physically to coffee sometime or to hang out? Aha! And you talk to each other, oral culture. So you're not trapped in this world. You don't have to stay in this world. There's always these traces. All of them coexist at the same time. So there can be a freedom. Monica, I think you had a question.
I just wanted to tag on to that. So what happens when we acquire text literacy? So it's been said that it reduces our ability to memory. So as opposed to the bards that could recite, presumably reads
the whole of Iliad.
Yes. So the idea that we've done that culturally, but also individually. So as soon as we learn to read, our ability of oral memory, it's almost replaced by the text. So your question really prompts this, this idea of dependence on maybe chat, other forms, but we have this kind of dependence on text already, which of course I love that dependence, except I can never quote anything.
Well, just to pull from the insights of Elul, as you would say that the movement we're in now is text has now been eliminated and we've moved to the image. Right? So that
the meme.
Yeah, that whereas before it was about hearing, right, and interpreting the word, now it's about image. And so then how do we live in that world where it's more about visual and sight, seeing to believe? But now the erosion of trust in sight. So we're losing trust in any of our sensory capacities, and perhaps it's getting back out into the world with people and the relationship and the turn to the sacraments. And I think what you said about the church is the way in which you organize the architecture, and it doesn't have to be high or low, but the placement of the sacraments and the way in which they are practiced tells us a lot about the way in which we see the world, because those school us in the way of seeing the present, symbolic or real, right, of God in the most unlikely of things. And how do we actually practice that to see God's presence in other people and things, right? That's the place where we learn, but we can't do that if we're staring at screens.
Thinking of architecture, then I'll jump right over there. If you look at our campus, can I just say very briefly? Or what would you like?
Go ahead.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, just very briefly, if you look at, this isn't true for Christian institutions as well. So what's the biggest building on Trinity campus that you see as soon as you drive in? The business building, which I love. I love the building business, the faculty. I love the faculty building. I go over there to sit with Starbucks. But so, where's the chapel?
It's open to the sky. The tree.
They couldn't raise the money for the chapel. They could just put together a few stones. That's all the money they could get. But there was at least $32 million for the business building. So what does architecture say about what systems we're operating within? That is not to say that the business faculty have those values or not. That is really to do with the donors and what they're interested in donating to. Sorry, there you go ahead.
I'm seeing that there's a few comments online that I can just share, and then we'll also take more questions from the floor. So having to scroll back a bit here, Adam asks, or maybe this is a comment and a question, ChatGPT and other AI-based tools are great for providing information, but it's incapable of instilling wisdom, the proper response or use of the information in its user. How do we equip students and other AI users to move beyond the realm of information and into wisdom? Obviously, this is a large question, but what are your initial recommendations?
You shouldn't use it for information. I use it for information, but like when I'm in a hurry and I feel terrible about it. But you shouldn't, because if in the past, I would have actually gone and pulled all the books out of my shelves, and then I would have looked at the information, and I would have read what was all around it, and then I would have read more. That's what I used to do. I'd physically go to the library, then I'd find the books beside each side, and then my wisdom would grow. And so we really shouldn't be, unless we're in an emergency, we need to do CPR, like save someone's life.
Hopefully the information is quality, the data set is, yeah.
Yeah, and also, like Wikipedia, we go there for information. I've gone there. It's all plagiarized. I'm plagiarized on Wikipedia. I'm like, ooh, who's this brilliant person? And it was me. And then, but I had to quote, I'm joking about that, by the way. I had to put quotations and put me at the bottom. Like, it's all plagiarized. They're taking it from books. And so that information is often inaccurate. So really, we shouldn't be doing that. We're losing things by doing that. But we, in the interest of expediency, speed, etc., we do it.
I think that's a really great question. I think as someone who's in theology and ethics, I actually think about questions around theology and ethics ultimately summarized by wisdom, which is not knowledge. It's part of knowledge, but it's more than knowledge. And I think we're far too influenced by the Greeks and not always as influenced as we should be by the Hebrew way of thinking about wisdom. And that God chose to bind God's self to a particular people who saw the world in a particular way and approached wisdom in a particular way should really get us thinking about what is it about this people's wisdom that should be our guide in thinking about what wisdom is. And it's a very on-the-ground, curious, a little bit suspicious, but also like wondrous look. I was thinking about the one quote of, we often say use good discernment, but I just think about, the wisdom literature saying there's a way that seems right to everybody, and that doesn't normally end well. And actually the seduction of what seems to be the right way and getting seduced in the wrong way. So what is the right way? What's the way that leads to life? And we were talking about this before of like what's outside of the technological system. The movements of the ants, the shuddering of the trees, right? The cries of the rocks. Like those are particular ways of looking at the world and seeing in that the wisdom of a God who established all of it and is present somehow. Not identical with it, but present somehow. So that's kind of what I think we need to be chasing after, is that type of wisdom, because there's often this assumption in the artificial intelligence world that if we get enough quantity, then it'll get quality information, right? And I just don't know that more and more quantity will produce the type of quality that we're looking for. Like quantity of knowledge equals quality of wisdom. I don't think that's, it's apples and pineapples, I guess.
I'm thinking about the role of the sage. What they would pour honey on the word, and they'd let their mentee taste it to see that it's good. And I'm thinking about Bob's statement that we're trading our birthmark for a trademark. Birthmark is it's a very bodily sign or symbol of the fact that we have to come down to the ground. To quote the great Peter Gabriel at the end of the theme song to WALL-E is we're coming down to the ground. And it's all about coming back to the earth and being able to dance and being able to walk and be together in very embodied, incarnate ways. Okay, there's a few piling up here, so I'll just take one more from here because it comes from 8:15. AI also encourages isolation because all the answers are online instead of through shared meaningful conversations. So again, there's this theme of disincarnate. And then Lynn Zabo's point, although this is a different focus, I wonder what the panel thinks in regard to the inequities that AI creates in the larger social order between the literate and illiterate and many other differing concerns. Are these also concerns that Christians might have to think about?
Absolutely. I haven't thought of that deeply, but it's part of the global network. We have so many sort of national corporations. We sort of see the world as a giant economy. And those in the economy, and it's very, very complex. I do not have any training in economics, but it's a very complex system. And though we say, so for example, India is moving up to a more they're having a more powerful middle class, for example, slowly. But it's very unstable middle class. And the middle class is sort of built on the labor, the sort of, it's like Victorian England, this harsh, brutal labor for pennies. So we're almost in some ways reconstructing our economic system that has real historical problems. And I'm not talking about capitalism per se. Late capitalism is quite different than how capitalism initially formed. So from a global perspective, we are using AI systems in agriculture, in information sharing, in banking, and so forth, in order to sort of repeat
Our progress story.
Our progress story, and if other people suffer along the way so that we can benefit, oh, so be it. The poor, I heard a Christian minister, a female Christian minister say, oh, the poor are always with us, to justify why she had a jet. So we have to revisit our own view of money, of economy, of exchange and bartering. Otherwise, AI just becomes part of reproducing that system.
The other thing I'd say is the quality of the information outputs is only as good as the information inputs. So there have been really disturbing cases where mortgages are being denied for certain people based on the information that's being fed to the machine learning algorithms, right? So basically, if the information is discriminatory based on social class, then if you're applying for a mortgage, like that could be just information tied to your family, right? Then, however far back, then you could be denied and somebody else could be approved. There's also, discussions around like real applications in law. So based on somebody's criminal record and assessing probabilities with all the information that it has, is this person likely to reoffend? Or with medicine, right? Oh, think of all the cures that we can use with machine learning. Yes, and also think about the insurance companies who can, combine all the medical records and deny some of us medical insurance because we've been found to have this or that predisposition, which means that they want to cut their losses and deny. So I don't want to scare anybody, but maybe we should have like a little bit of, it's never like total capital U or, utopia or capital D dystopia. It's a little bit more of a mixed bag.
Yes, absolutely.
But,
getting worse.
and so it's always like what is outside of our vision with the people who are advocating for this the most, or even the environmental impact. Like we think about things like cloud computing as this really immaterial thing, but actually data centers are very large. They consume a lot of power, and they really have an effect on the environment, and the people working in those places often do so in really poor working conditions. So I think it's a great question of like this larger system, and it's just kind of hidden in plain view.
Can I just add one comment to Lynn's question about the inequity that is actually creatively produced by our technologies. Illich took the word subsistence and he elevated it to the idea that we all have, every culture has wisdom, layers and layers and layers of wisdom, and that every people group have capabilities and gifts. And if a system, like you were talking about, of say education or economy, is imposed upon a people group, and those people are made to comply with the system, they're made to feel a kind of poverty that they didn't know before. They were rich in their birthmark, or their what's another word for birthmark? The heritage of another term that I take from something that Bob sent me, the elusive store. That there's a richness, sedimented wisdom and cultural wisdom, cultural knowledge that is there already, and then the system comes along as an imposed on them that they must fit into this system or they don't pass. They're failures. And so it actually perpetuates poverty or introduces a kind of poverty into a people group that we're feeling well off or already privileged with the gifts that have been passed on to them. So there's a kind of creative production of poverty that can come through systems. Okay, yeah.
I wanted to make a comment on a previous.
Yeah, please make it. I want to hear your comment, if you remember.
Yeah, this is a way back. We were talking about orality and when writing came in that possibly we lost something. But I kind of disagree with that, mostly because the writing is still from a person. It's still an expression, a creative expression of their thoughts and what they're all about. I kind of think of this sometimes because I am in charge of a library at my college, and I tell my students that sometimes when I walk through the stacks, I hear the conversation of the ages, because these are representations of people's thoughts. These are real people expressing what they know and what they want to communicate. The problem with AI is that there's no person behind it, and that's my concern. I still think writing is really important, and because it's an expression of an individual, I'm just not sure about what AI is, except maybe a confluence.
Gathering of information.
Gathering of information. Yeah.
Alan James calls it breaking bread with the dead. But how did you put it again? The conversation of the ages?
It's just walking through the stacks. Just you kind of hearing the little bits of things that people have written and said in their words, in their books. If you're doing a movie or something, you probably hear this little flutter in the background as you're walking through an aisle. Of all of the people who are talking through the
crossing the distance through the pages.
And you would have it's interesting, you and Tracy, who's our archivist, head archivist at our university, you would have such a different experience, I think, of the Hebrew people. They use the same word for word and thing. And in libraries, don't ask me to explain that again. It's very, I know my knowledge of it is this small, but you're with these things all the time in the library. So you're really attaching words and things and image and words. And so thank you so much for sharing that.
Mine actually works fairly closely with what was just said, but I'm bringing together a few different threads of what's been talked about, especially the issues of pedagogy and formation, as well as inefficiency and false creation. One of the things that always troubles me, and this is something that's troubled me since before ChatGPT and how we teach. I say this as the dean who has to push everyone to teach in specific ways, exactly the ways you were talking about. But as a biblical scholar and classicist, I'm constantly reading certain texts that talk about the conversation. And one of my biggest issues is that ChatGPT is this false conversation, that it's bringing together a number of different texts, this bizarre intertextuality that just flattens everything in a very mercenary and hollow way. And then looking at so many ancient Jewish writers, and you brought up the Midrash, but even pre-Midrashic exegesis, this bringing together, finding certain words that go together and bringing these texts together. Specifically, I'm thinking of Philo and Josephus both talk about the importance of the inefficiency of biblical reading in synagogues, where the whole point is that these people who are being, the Romans are saying you're lazy, you're not working one day in a week, and both of them respond the same way, that they're putting down what they do so that they can come and hear. I mean, in Philo's version, their ancient philosophy; in Josephus's, their how does he put it? Well, he puts it a number of different ways, but their ancient teachings through the constant reading. And Josephus goes so far as to say that because they're constantly hearing this, other people, they don't know their law until they've broken it and they're before a judge. Our people will be able to give the entire law before they can even give their own name. And it's this constant formation. Then, of course, going a little bit further to the incarnational, I mean, Jesus in Luke 4 brings together two slightly disparate texts from Isaiah, Isaiah 58:6 and 61 something, brings them together and then follows that up with, and I've just fulfilled this. And again, this ability to take text conversationally and intertextually and make them meaningful and make them foundational for both, for Josephus, it's for both the individual and the community. And I think that's so much of what we wind up missing with.
And it's so embodied, the type and the antitype. If you think of our typological exegesis, we're making patterns like ChatGPT, but they're so deep, they're so meaningful, they have such resonance compared to what I love how your metaphor of flattening. Could I just ask Tess a question, would you mind? As a business student, and what department are you in?
I'm in general studies.
I was wondering, because a lot of us are in humanities, so we tend to have a set view. I was just wondering, as a business student or a general humanities, do you have anything that you could, and they don't have to be brilliant or anything, just thoughts on how you would respond to this from a different perspective?
I'm not sure. I'm just a first-year student. I like what you guys said earlier about speaking from more of a human setting, speaking to students as they're a human. Yeah.
No, that's really a good point. Do you know that most, many of the very successful English majors and humanity majors go into business, and they're very, very successful there because of their social cognition, their empathy, and their ability to think in these complex ways. So, and that's the kind of people we need in the business world. And did you have a thought at all you'd like to say? You don't have to.
No, I agree with what she said.
I would say, though, that that it can actually be really disconcerting for students to have teachers that actually ask what they think and encourage them to talk. I mean, this is why I tell a lot of people I have zero problem doing monologues about things I think I'm interested in, because I'm an external processor and I can do that. But I actually learned spending time in the UK higher education system is you're expected to read and show up and talk. And the professor and professors there facilitate the conversation, but they actually want to hear what other people are saying. And looking back at my own way of learning, the teachers here, growing up in North America that did that, actually I enjoyed the classes the most. Now, I also know that there are people who are like, no way, no how. I have to crystallize this thought after the class and then I'll come back. Those ones tend to be quiet in class, but then they write a paper and you're like, whoa, you need to say more. But I actually hear sometimes, it's disconcerting because you're expected as an educator to download information. And that's the producer-consumer model. It's the assembly line approach. It's the banking deposit way. That's Paulo Freire, right? The banking model of education that we just dump all of our knowledge into your heads, and then you memorize it, and then maybe one day you'll be up there and you can do the same.
You can't memorize anymore because our memories are going.
And then you're replaced, you're dethroned. But actually,
I can just go consult ChatGPT.
Exactly. Why not? So that's why I think like I was mean to the Greeks, but I think the Greeks did get one thing right, which was dialogue. You can't dialectic. You have to learn via exchange, and that's one of the many things that they got right, is that it's via dialogue. But I think sometimes the expectation is that there's the knowledge expert that downloads, and everybody's an expert in something, but you can't learn that until you actually have a proper conversation.
Juliet Kuhnor, one of her wonderful students in humanities, English, is going to Oxford in the spring, and she's going to be in that tutorial system, so we'll see how she does. Juliet, Faith, and Brett, you're all from the humanities. Do you have any thoughts on the questions or thoughts? You don't have to. Don't panic, Faith Nelson. Don't panic. She may or may not be related to me, but do you have any thoughts?
I could say something really quick just on the efficiency we talked about, because as a student I do feel there is often a pressure, like time-wise, we have 13 weeks to learn all of this, and you come to school expecting that, in a sense, like this model of I'm coming, I'm paying a lot, I want the information, but on the other hand it always feels like we're running out of time. Profs are always busy. It's just, and I don't know how that could change, because that's just the way our culture is, and it's also what we expect and what we want. So,
can I try to answer that question?
That's Rayhan.
I'm on Zoom.
From beyond.
Yeah, your worst nightmare. Okay. I really like that question about efficiency, because I think one of the things that Professor Doty's classes made me aware of is how we've become the slaves of our own efficiency on a very deep philosophical level. And this question is that, yes, I love the topics and subjects I'm learning at TWU, but there is this pressure, and I'm not able to give the time that they deserve. These topics deserve much more time than the time allocation that is given to us. So the thing I wanted to answer that with is that there is, in our binary thinking, we have, you're either efficient or you're inefficient, right? In Taoist philosophy, there's this sort of idea of a flow that's kind of gentle but constant, a persistent, ongoing consistency rather than speed, if you will. And it's not stagnant and it's not rushing, but it's consistent movement. So in answer to the question, is it possible to design courses in TWU that are longer than 6 months, but you have more time to complete them?
Yeah, more credits. Yeah, good point. Rayhan is a Master's of Arts in Interdisciplinary Humanities. Sarah hasn't asked anything, and then we could come back.
I was just going to follow up comment with that, because I understand that challenge of time as well, and perhaps I use a different metaphor. I do think of it as planting seeds. You have 4 years to plant a lot of seeds that will bear fruit, hopefully, years and years later, and will continue to grow. You can always reread those novels. And actually, when you do reread them, you learn more, you experience more, you deepen, your knowledge.
That reminds me, I do sometimes have to just tell a lot of students, don't worry. It's going to be okay. Retroactive learning's a thing.
Yes.
And it's amazing how God can actually bring something up. And I remember there's one of my favorite books on art and faith is by the author of A Wrinkle in Time. It's called, Walking on Water. And she said a kid came up to her and said, I don't think I really understood what you wrote in your book, but I knew what it was about. And then they had a conversation on what the book was about. And I think that just captures it exactly. Just sometimes you have to go, sometimes all you do is just let it filter through. And just even if you get 10%, if that 10% is a hermeneutic for human existence, you're good. It's okay. Like, you know, like the first time I read some of these, like, you know, post-structuralist thinkers, and I was like, I understand 5%, but the 5% I get, I am like, the scales have fallen from my eyes. But like the terror that I think a lot of people experience is like, how do we just normalize just feeling like you're not doing enough, or like saying, hey, we're all feeling like imposters, even the people up front, right?
I was just going to say that a class longer than 6 months scares me. One of the experiences I did have is when the pandemic started, I had started a systematic theology course. And the teacher had taught for 20 years at the University of Edinburgh, so he was used to the tutoring and discussion method. He threw away the script for the course. We read Augustine, we read Calvin, and we read Karkainen. And if you can imagine, those three can't be any different from others. But discussing that, I took more away from that 13-week class, where I only wrote one paper. So your mark was participation, so you had to be there every week and discuss, and write one paper. I took more away from that course than I think I did any other systematic theology course. Just the interaction and the transfer of knowledge with the professor. Because the downloading model just breaks your brain.
That's quality over quantity. He's absolutely right. Absolutely. I'm sorry, I just had to burst in.
I agree.
And there's a time when writing papers is the stage that you're at as a learner, and the actual writing is part of the integrating. It's up to us to get better at creating assignments for writing that are truly integrative and allow for rumination. Maybe reading out loud as you're writing.
Because teachers are getting sick of reading the same. Well, I am. I shouldn't be for all speakers. But if I have to read another, like, argumentative essay with the same, I mean, I'm going to collapse from it. Dr. Hilder is wonderful. She's so inventive and coming up with creative assignments for the students. And
well, I just let the students have free reign. I'm amazed by what the students write.
Yeah, that's just remarkable. And I think that we have to open up ourselves. And we use the scientific model for essays. Why are people in humanities using scientific models for essays, hypothesis, And so, we have to be creative, more creative than we are.
But it works for some people.
Yes, we need some assignments like that.
We do.
Logic.
Well, I mean, I use the scientific method for my writing in the humanities.
Yes, and that's fine, because
it does work.
Yeah, it's one method of logic, but we need to be more creative as well.
But it's the craft. It's developing the craft, and part of that, right? I mean, to quote the great Miles Davis, you have to practice a lot to play like yourself. And speaking about the embodied practices of writing and reading, I mean, if you share an office with 3 other Ph.D. students, you get a real glimpse into what people need to do their best work. And it's very different, and it's very weird. But and a lot of them, it took them a long time, myself included, to hit their stride. To find out what it is that you need to do to produce, right? And so again, like, even just like allowing people to discover the craft and the voice, that's something that can't be rushed. I'm conscious of time. We probably have time for one more question.
Sylvia, did you have a question before? I couldn't remember. Brett, do you have something you'd like to say?
It's okay if someone else can speak.
No, I'd like you to, if you've got something.
Sorry, I have so many different things. I'll try to pluck one. Well, one thing, there's the whole efficiency question, and that really speaks to me because, like others, I feel that there's always just not enough time for what you want to do, but it's also, you make time to do other things. And then I always find myself doing what I'm not supposed to be doing, then running up to do what I'm supposed to be doing in a third of the time I should have allotted to it. And yet I also find that can sometimes be very productive. So I guess that what I'd love to find is a way there's more opportunities to get time that's less structured, but also that can be used for ways to do something more fully, if that makes sense.
Yeah, my mother was a developmental psychologist, and she would always say to me when I was doing nothing, or I thought I was doing nothing, like, and during my doctoral studies for a year, all I could do is eat bonbons and watch soap operas. I thought, I can't finish this, until I got pregnant, and I thought, oh, I have to, because I might have to support this child. And but she said, no, your work, your mind is doing, because I thought you had to read everything in the library, so all I was doing is reading and reading. On my topic, and but no, you need that. That's very generative and creative, that work. And so people, I don't know if some of you will go and think all of a sudden you have to clean a room. Yes, when you're supposed to be writing. But that actually has a purpose, and it's a meaningful purpose. And we do need to carve that space and time, and to think of how we organize the learning process around making that space and time as well.
Corey mentions that it's learning is cyclical, and the productivity that you referred to, Brett, I know that you are on a learning journey that has to do with productivity of the self, like expanding yourself. And I'm so glad that there is play, even amongst the writers and the readers. There's playful engagement as well. I again come back to nothing is lost. Everything is being sedimented inside.
Yeah,
the incarnate word.
There's another fancy word, ludic culture. It's such an ugly word, ludic, but it means play.
Yeah.
But ludic culture in the classroom. And one of the sessions I sort of studied under professionally was that we give children in elementary school color to sniff. They can smell the pens and they smell so good. All this multi-sensory learning and music, and then in university we force people just to sit there and just listen. I can barely stand to hear myself talking when I'm talking. Like, I can't talk for more than 30 minutes was hard. Like, 20 minutes is about all I can bear. And we shut down all the senses. And so, we need to have that space of play, ludic culture. And like someone like Leah Cameron, who not only has her master's in English stream, but she also is a yoga instructor, and she's also a dancer. So even when you see her teach, you have this sense of embodiment and movement, and yet to bring all of that to play in the classroom.
I have 3 very quick comments. One, in my undergraduate years, when we read Milton, we had a group of us read Paradise Lost. All the geeks would meet together in a room, and we'd take the different characters. So sometimes I was Satan, sometimes I was Eve, and we used different voices, and it was a riot. Like, it was an absolute riot. I learned that book because of that participatory learning. Right. Okay, 1. 2, ChatGPT. I tell my students, Spartans, when you don't feel like training for the day, do you say to your friend, could you train for me? No, it's hard work. Writing is hard work. 3, we have to leave. There's lots of food, so there are students here in the dorm. Please get it.
Take an eat.
Incarnate.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. All of you for coming, and our online audience, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists. Let's give them a round.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming, and just keep your eye online and signage about for another In the Chair Symposium. It'll probably be in the spring. So the topic is yet to be determined, but we hope you can come out for that too.
And if you were nervous to say anything and you just want to share something or ask something, just come up front.